Hey, hey. Imagine this. A cocky, wealthy young man storms into your home, demanding that he takes your wife away for a couple of nights. Not only that, he starts throwing threats around like he's invincible. My first instinct? To knock that smug look right off his face, give him a few good punches. But I decided against it. I wasn't in the best mood that Thursday afternoon anyway, as I loaded my tools into the back of my pickup truck. The client I'd been working with for 3 weeks couldn't make up their mind about the staircase project. They kept changing the design, and that morning's request would require undoing most of the work I had already completed. To make matters worse, I had to loop in the architect and engineer to rework the plans to suit the client's latest fancy. This meant redrawing structural details from scratch, so my Friday unexpectedly turned into a day off. My name is James Foster, owner of a small carpentry business that specializes in crafting high-end staircases. I work with wealthy homeowners, hotels, restaurants, and offices. Clients who don't blink at spending $30,000 or more for a custom piece. I'm 33, and I've been married to Laura Mitchell, who's 29, for 4 years. Laura is a lawyer at Blake, Baker, and Bennett, a firm known for handling commercial and intellectual property law cases. We don't have kids yet. Laura's too focused on building her career right now. When I got home that day, I noticed Laura's car was already parked in the driveway. Normally she worked late on Thursdays so she could leave early on Fridays. I entered through the back door, the usual route after a long day on the job site. I noticed the water pressure seemed a little off. Laura being in the shower at that time of day was unusual. She typically showered in the morning or before bed. After changing into something more comfortable, I went upstairs to check why she was home so early. Sure enough, Laura had just finished showering. She stood there, slipping into a pair of black fishnet stockings. A brand new black dress was draped across the bed, waiting to be worn. "Hey, honey, you're home early. Did I forget about something? Do we have plans tonight?" I asked, a bit confused. Her expression caught me off guard, a nervous look I wasn't used to seeing on her face. She let out a sigh before speaking. "No, James, you didn't forget anything. I'm going out tonight, but you're not. I'll be gone until Sunday afternoon. I'm spending the weekend with Andrew Blake." I blinked, not quite sure I heard her correctly. "What are you talking about? Is this some sort of business trip?" "No, it's not work-related. Andrew has a suite reserved at the hotel for us. I'll be back by next week," she replied, her tone firm, like she'd practiced this conversation in her head already. My mind was racing. "You've got to be kidding me. You're my wife. I don't want you spending the weekend with another man. What the hell is this?" I demanded, anger bubbling up. She gave a cold laugh. "You better accept it, James, because that's what Andrew wants. And trust me, you don't want to cross him." I stared at her, disbelief flooding me. "You expect me to just sit back and let you go off for the weekend with another man, and then come back and pretend like nothing happened?" Laura's eyes glinted as she shrugged. "Andrew's already mentioned this might happen from time to time, so yes, deal with it. Your life will be a lot simpler if you just go along with it." I clenched my fists, barely containing my frustration. "We'll see about that. I'm not going to stand by and let some arrogant guy dictate my life. You better think long and hard about what you're doing, because I won't be pushed around." She didn't respond, simply continued getting ready while I stormed downstairs and grabbed a beer from the fridge. That's when I saw it. A sleek Mercedes pulling up outside. And who should step out but Mr. Arrogance himself? "James, that's Andrew. Would you mind getting the door?" Laura called from upstairs. Instead of answering, I walked to the back door, punched the code into the alarm, and set my phone up to record the whole thing. Tucking it discreetly into my shirt pocket, I sat back on the couch, bracing for what was coming. I'd known Andrew Blake since Laura started working at Blake, Bradley, and Barrett. He was always around, a man in his late 30s with a magnetic but overbearing presence. He was charming with his colleagues, but with everyone else, especially in front of their spouses, he exuded arrogance. We never clicked. Laura descended the stairs and opened the door. "Sorry for the delay, Andrew," she said in a soft voice, one I hadn't heard her use before. She whispered something to him, but I couldn't make it out. Then Andrew, looking as smug as ever, sauntered into the living room like he owned the place. "Hey there, James. I hear you've got a problem with Laura spending the weekend with me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I stared at him, fury building. "Get out of my house before I call the cops," I growled, trying to keep my cool. He let out a laugh, glancing over at Laura, who smirked. Call the cops? And what exactly are they going to do, James? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He paused, then noticed the bulge of my phone in my pocket. You recording me, James? He moved to grab the phone, but it was locked. In his frustration, he hurled it to the ground, smashing it. Listen here, you clever little prick, he spat, his tone turning dark. Your wife is spending the weekend with me whether you like it or not. You've got no say in this. Clear? I stood up, ready to fight, but he leaned in, his voice low. And if you even think of trying to interfere, I'll make sure you regret it. So, be a good little husband and stay quiet. Don't cause trouble, or you'll wish you hadn't. I listened to his threats, doing my best to keep a neutral expression, though inside my mind was spinning with possible reactions. Every fiber of my being wanted to throw him out, land a punch square on that smug face of his. But I resisted. He was playing a game, and if I wanted to have any control over this, I had to be smart. I've never been involved in money laundering or any criminal activity, especially not with anything related to children, I replied, my voice steady as I tried to brush off his accusations. But he wasn't done. His persistence was unnerving. That could be easily arranged, he said coolly. Uploading that kind of material to your computer is child's play. I have access to things that could ruin your life in an instant. His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, his tone dripping with menace. I decided to challenge him, keeping up my act of innocence. So, you're saying you already have this kind of material? Isn't that illegal? I asked, hoping to poke holes in his confidence. But he brushed it off with arrogant ease. That's the difference between you and me, he sneered. What's illegal for you doesn't apply to people like me. When you have the right connections, certain things become permissible. He didn't stop there. He made sure to warn me against seeking any kind of revenge, and even threw in a vile comment about my intimacy with Laura, his words as degrading as they were calculated. As I sat there, absorbing his threats and manipulations, I felt like I was trapped in some surreal nightmare. My emotions swung between anger and disbelief. Yet, amid the chaos, I took comfort in one thing: my home security system. After a previous break-in, I had installed comprehensive surveillance, complete with video and audio recording throughout the house. Laura didn't even know about it. And the phone Andrew had smashed? Just a decoy? I had been prepared for this. When Andrew and Laura finally left, the weight of the situation hit me hard. Despite my shock and anger, there was a small sense of relief. I now had undeniable proof of his threats and manipulation. A valuable tool if I decided to pursue divorce. I picked up the broken pieces of the phone Andrew had thrown. It was my business phone, one I'd bought specifically to deal with the kind of high-maintenance clients who thought I was at their beck and call 24/7. At least my personal phone was intact, so I wasn't entirely without a way to communicate. I called Jacob, my lawyer and best friend. Jacob Taylor had been married to my older sister Sarah before tragedy struck. Sarah drowned during a trip to the Gulf 4 years into their marriage. Despite his grief, Jacob remained close to our family, earning our respect and love. 3 years later, he found love again with Jessica, and they married after a year of dating. Laura and I attended their wedding, and to this day, Jacob and Jessica feel like siblings to me. When I explained everything that had happened, the threats, Andrew's audacity, and Laura's shocking betrayal, Jacob was quick to offer his support. He told me to stay put, turn off all communication devices, and assured me that he and Jessica would be over in an hour with dinner. His calm guidance was exactly what I needed in that moment. As I waited, I reflected on the whirlwind of events. Laura had always been ambitious, but I never imagined she'd be seduced by Andrew's power. It was a bitter realization that our bond wasn't as strong as I thought. Laura and I had met 5 years ago at a birthday party for a friend's brother, an army officer stationed overseas. I didn't know many people there, but I struck up a conversation with Laura, and we hit it off instantly. One date turned into many, and within a year, we were married. At the time, I was working for Mr. Miller, a well-known local carpenter. Jacob Miller was a master of woodworking, but a disaster when it came to managing finances. I had joined his company as a part-time accountant during college. Shortly after, he landed several large contracts and needed my help on site. That's how I got into woodworking, running errands, fetching supplies, and helping with the heavy lifting. I learned fast, and soon I was able to take on projects on my own. After getting certified, I became his partner, When Mr. Miller retired, my parents helped me buy out his share, and I've been running the business ever since. Despite my success, many of Laura's colleagues at Blake, Bradley, and Barrett dismissed me as some uneducated tradesman. It didn't bother me. My business was thriving, and I had recently hired 2 assistants. My income was higher than that of most of the lawyers at the firm, though even Laura was unaware of just how well things were going. My thoughts were interrupted when Jacob and Jessica arrived with Chinese takeout and a couple of beers. Jessica greeted me with a warm hug. "Are you okay, James?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I can't believe Laura did this," Jacob said, giving me a firm hug. "This isn't like her at all." "Don't worry, man. We'll figure this out," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Let's eat first, then we'll check the recording." After dinner, I pulled out my laptop and loaded the surveillance footage. The video and audio were crystal clear. Andrew's arrogance played back in front of us. Every threat, every condescending remark. "I can't believe what I just heard," Jacob said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Quite the arrogant jerk, huh?" I replied. "Arrogant? More like a fool," Jacob corrected. "This guy has been practicing law for 15 years, and yet he's so full of himself that he doesn't even realize when he's digging his own grave. Your decoy phone trick worked perfectly. He thought he was in the clear, and now we've got all the evidence we need. But can we actually use it? I mean, he didn't know he was being recorded," I asked, needing legal clarity. "James, this is your home. You have every right to record what happens here," Jacob assured me. "So I've got nothing to worry about?" I asked, still processing the weight of it all. "No, that's not what I'm saying. We need to tread carefully," Jacob reiterated, his voice firm. "I did some digging on the way here, thanks to Logan driving and handling the takeout. Turns out, our friend Andrew is none other than the son of the founder of their law firm." I nodded, already knowing about Andrew's family connections. It was no secret that his father, Colin Blake, had built the firm's reputation. "What you might not know," Jacob continued, "is that Colin wasn't much of a lawyer, but he was well connected. Most of the judges in the area were his old college buddies. With that network, winning cases became easy. Unfortunately, Andrew's following in his father's footsteps, and that's what makes him dangerous." Jacob's concern was palpable. "Andrew's got a wide circle of friendly judges. If he decides to take legal action, getting a judgment in our favor is going to be tough, even if he's doing something illegal." "So what? No matter what I do, I'm screwed?" I asked, the weight of the situation starting to settle in. "Not exactly," Jacob said, offering some reassurance. "It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. I've got connections too. The key is to gather enough evidence to build a strong case against him." I took a deep breath, feeling slightly better, but still shaken. Just then, a knock came at the door. I turned to see a petite brunette standing on the porch. "Hi, Mr. Foster," she greeted me politely. "Come on in, Aaron," Jacob called, waving her inside. "James, this is Aaron Reed, a computer specialist from the private investigative firm we work with. I reached out to her after our earlier call," Jacob explained. Aaron wasted no time. We filled her in on the situation, focusing on the part where Andrew had threatened to plant incriminating material on my computer. Aaron listened carefully, then laid out a plan. "Okay, there are 2 ways they might try to do this," she began, all business. "First, they could come here during the day, with your wife's help, and physically access your computer. They'd change the date, upload the material, and make it seem like it was done before Andrew even showed up. If that happens, your camera system should capture everything. So, make sure it's set to record every day before you leave for work." She pulled a small gray box from her bag. "The second option is remote access. They might try to hack into your computer and plant the files that way. This module will monitor your modem and router. It'll track any unauthorized access attempts, whether they're uploading or downloading files. Before I install it, though, transfer all your sensitive files onto a flash drive and wipe your computer clean," she advised. "The goal is to leave them nothing to tamper with." "I'll help you with that to make sure nothing gets missed," Aaron added confidently, her expertise obvious. Jacob jumped in. "Here's the deal, James. Right now, your only solid evidence is the recording of Andrew's threats. That's good, but blackmail alone might not be enough. Public opinion doesn't take blackmail too seriously, and his judge friends might brush it off. What we really need is for Andrew to go through with his plan, to upload illegal material onto your computer. If he does that and then reports you to the police, we'll have a digital trail, and with the recording of his threat, it'll be clear that the files were planted." I shook my head, disgusted. "That's twisted." Yeah, but so is Andrew, Jacob said grimly. One more thing. Avoid using your computer for the next few days. If Andrew does follow through, the police might want to check your computer's activity. If you don't use it, the records will show that the illegal material was uploaded without you touching anything. Also, keep your phone off your home Wi-Fi, just to be safe. Aaron quickly set up the surveillance module, wiping all the sensitive data from my computer and phone. The module will send copies of any access attempts straight to us, she explained as she packed up her tools. I'll keep in touch with Jacob. Good luck, guys. After Aaron left, Jacob turned to me. So, do you want to start the divorce process now, or wait until Laura gets back and see if things can be worked out? No, I replied firmly. I want out as soon as possible. I can't stay with someone who's so easily swayed by a man like Andrew. There's no point in dragging this out. All right, Jacob said, nodding. I'll contact Catherine Davis first thing tomorrow. She's the best family law attorney in our firm. Fair, quick, and efficient. She'll reach out to you. We spent the rest of the evening going over the situation. I gave Jacob access to my surveillance system so he could keep tabs on everything remotely. When Jacob and Jessica finally left around 10 p.m., I took a melatonin and was asleep within half an hour. The next morning, Catherine Davis called me at 8:30 sharp. Jacob had already briefed her on my situation, and she asked me to come by her office by noon. During our meeting, Catherine was sympathetic. After hearing about Andrew's reputation, she reassured me that since I'd bought the house before marrying Laura, it was mine. Her name wasn't on the deed, so there was no risk of her claiming the property. With no kids involved, Catherine said the divorce should be straightforward. I asked about my company, whether I'd be forced to sell it and split the proceeds. Catherine shook her head. Don't worry, the marriage contract clearly states that the company is yours. She has no legal claim to it. They might try something, but they don't have any grounds. We wrapped up the meeting by 1:45 p.m. Catherine promised Laura would be served with divorce papers at her office on Monday. That afternoon, I replaced my smashed phone and spent the rest of the weekend working in the yard, trying to distract myself with mindless tasks. Even though my anger toward Laura simmered just beneath the surface, I hadn't fully processed everything yet. I knew the grief over our marriage would hit me eventually, but for now, I was too overwhelmed. I dreaded her return on Sunday. Should I sleep in the guest room, or should I make her sleep there? In the end, I decided it was my house. She'd abandoned me. I wasn't about to share my bed with her again. I moved all her things into the guest room and installed a new lock on my bedroom door. The key stayed in my pocket. That evening, I heard Andrew's car pull up outside. I watched through the window as Laura kissed him, a long, lingering kiss, before waving him off. I sat in the living room, pretending to read, not even looking up when she walked in. "How was your weekend?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but failing to hide her anxiety. I stayed focused on my book. "Fine," I answered flatly. "Go ahead and sulk," she sneered. "Andrew said you'd react like this, like a child who can't understand or accept reality." She turned and went upstairs, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. I waited, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. "James, did you put a lock on our bedroom?" she shouted, her voice sharp. "Correction," I said, still calm. "On my bedroom. Your things are in the guest room. You'll be staying there until you find a place." "What the hell? Wait until Andrew hears about this. This wasn't part of the arrangement." "Arrangement?" I spat. "What arrangement? I didn't agree to anything. You can stay in the guest room or leave. Maybe Andrew's wife will let you crash at their place." Without another word, she stormed into the guest room and slammed the door. I followed her upstairs, yelling through the door. Speaking of arrangements, what exactly was in it for me? Silence. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Texts from an unknown number. "What's this I hear, cuck? You won't let Laura into her own room?" I thought I made myself perfectly clear. Even someone like you should understand that. I'll overlook your little tantrum for tonight, but tomorrow, you'll make Laura her favorite dinner and apologize for your behavior. Play nice for the rest of the week, and I'll allow her to be intimate with you next weekend. Fail to follow my instructions, and I'll show you just how real my threats are. Got it? I stared at the message, barely able to believe the audacity. The sheer arrogance and delusion were almost laughable, if not for how sick it made me feel. Instead of replying, I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Jacob. He responded within minutes. "Unbelievable. This guy really thinks he's something special. Keep the conversation intact, and don't respond. Blake sent a couple more texts, but I ignored them, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Eventually, the messages stopped. I didn't see Laura for the rest of the night, and when I went to bed, I made sure to lock the door and leave the recording system running. The next morning, I got up after Laura had already left. She'd showered in the guest bathroom and left without saying a word or touching anything in the kitchen. I made breakfast for myself and downloaded the footage from the night before, finding nothing out of the ordinary. For once, she hadn't tried anything with my computer. A text from Catherine Davis pinged on my phone, just confirming that the divorce papers will be served at 10 o'clock this morning. I let Jacob know, and he replied with a thumbs up. Before heading to my shop, I double-checked that the security system was recording and set it to send alerts directly to my phone if anything happened. I had a meeting with an architect at noon to finalize some plans for a client, so I kept myself busy with smaller tasks until then. I fully expected a call from Laura after she was served the papers, but the call never came. By 11:40, I was surprised she still hadn't reached out. I messaged Jacob. "Laura hasn't contacted me yet. Strange." He replied quickly, "She's probably already talked to Blake about the papers. They might be planning something. I'll get Aaron on the line. Stay tuned." The meeting with the architect went surprisingly well, and I was able to keep my focus. I spent the rest of the afternoon maintaining my tools and tidying up the shop, trying to keep my mind off things. Around 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. Jacob messaged me, "It's happening." I quickly accessed the security system and watched the live feed from my house. Laura had returned, but she wasn't alone. She had brought an unfamiliar man with her. They went straight to my home office, where they immediately booted up my computer. The man didn't say much, but within minutes, he managed to crack my password and insert a flash drive. He was on my computer for about 15 minutes, doing God knows what. Fortunately, the security camera captured a clear shot of his face. Meanwhile, Laura went into the guest room and began packing her things into garbage bags, likely because her suitcases were in the master bedroom closet. Once the man was done with the computer, he told Laura he was leaving. She finished packing and left soon after. Jacob called as soon as the recording ended. "All right, James, head home and act like everything's normal. I'm guessing they'll contact the police either tonight or tomorrow, so be ready for a visit. It takes a few hours to get a search warrant, so expect them by tomorrow morning." "Could I be arrested?" I asked, the anxiety growing in my chest. "There's a chance. If it happens, stay quiet. Don't answer any questions. I've already spoken to Henry Miller, a solid criminal defense lawyer. He's seen all the recordings and says this should be an easy case." We went over a few more details, and I gave Jacob the code to control my security system in case I was arrested. By the time we wrapped up, I felt a little more prepared, but still on edge. The evening passed uneventfully. No police, no calls from Laura, and no more threats from Blake. I made myself a sandwich and watched TV, debating whether to tell my parents what was going on. In the end, I decided against it. Explaining surveillance systems, security footage, and digital evidence to my mom would only stress her out, and I didn't need that right now. The next day, while I was at the store, I got another notification, this time an intruder alert. I quickly texted Jacob and accessed the security feed. The police had entered my home and were attempting to disable the alarm. A few moments later, they succeeded, and the system went dark. Jacob informed me that he had captured everything and sent the images to Henry Miller. About an hour and a half later, 2 officers arrived at my shop and arrested me. They cuffed me, read me my rights, and took me to the station. I refused to answer any of their questions, just as Jacob had advised. After they processed me, they confiscated my phone and wallet and placed me in a cell with a few other detainees. Everyone kept to themselves, staring at the floor. After about 2.5 hours, a guard came and told me I had a visitor. I was led to a small meeting room where I expected to see my lawyer. Instead, I was greeted by Andrew Blake, his grin stretching as wide as the Golden Gate Bridge. He sat down across from me, saying nothing at first, just staring. I didn't break eye contact, determined not to give him the reaction he wanted. Once he was satisfied with his little display of dominance, he finally spoke. "Now do you understand how serious this is?" he asked, smugness oozing from every word. I said nothing. "I asked you a question, Foster," he spat, his voice rising. "Answer me." Still, I remained silent. "It's going to be your word against mine, you know. A carpenter versus one of the most powerful lawyers in the city. Care to guess how that'll go?" He stood up, clearly enjoying himself. I'll let you think about that overnight. Maybe sometime in this little cell will help you realize the position you're in." With that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I was returned to the cell, which now held fewer people than before. It was late afternoon when the guard came again to take me to another meeting room. This time, I was relieved to see a tall, blond man waiting for me, Henry Miller. "Good to meet you, James. I'm Henry Miller, your defense attorney. Jacob got in touch earlier when he couldn't reach you. We figured you might have been arrested." I filled Henry in on the events of the day, including Blake's visit. His jaw clenched as he listened, but he didn't interrupt. "All right," he said finally. "You'll be seeing a judge tomorrow. Expect a steep bail, but Jacob is on top of that. It's going to be a rough night, but hang in there. We've got you covered. Keep refusing to answer any questions, and I'll take care of Blake." The next morning, I stood before the judge, facing charges of possessing illegal materials involving children. The weight of the accusation was heavy, but I remained steadfast, pleading not guilty. As Henry had anticipated, the bail was set high, $17,000, but Jacob wasted no time securing the funds. By the afternoon, I was released, albeit under strict conditions. I wasn't allowed to leave the city or contact Laura, Andrew Blake, or anyone associated with their law firm. At least I could still work in my shop. Once out, they handed back my phone and wallet. Henry took me to lunch, and as we sat down with plates of fried chicken, the tension finally began to ease a little, but the gravity of everything that had happened still loomed large. "I held off on giving you too much information yesterday at the station," Henry began, pausing to take a sip of his iced tea, confidentiality and all. "But I've been doing some digging, and I found out a lot about Andrew Blake." "What did you find?" I asked, my curiosity sparking despite the exhaustion. "Well, for one thing," Henry leaned in, his expression serious, "it usually takes hours to get a search warrant, and only after that can they review what's found and get an arrest warrant. But in your case, they arrested you before they even finished searching the house." I blinked. "So you're saying the arrest was premature?" "Exactly," Henry confirmed, his voice sharp. "And another thing, despite the restriction on contacting anyone involved, Blake was allowed to see you. That's highly suspicious and points to this whole thing being staged, which, I should add, is completely illegal." I frowned, remembering what Jacob had told me. "But Jacob mentioned Andrew has a lot of influence with judges." Henry smiled reassuringly this time. "Not all of them. A guy like Andrew makes plenty of enemies along the way. We just have to be smart about how we play this." Later that afternoon, I finally returned to my shop, grabbed my car, and headed home. After the last few days, all I wanted was a long, hot shower and some quiet. But when I walked through the door, I found the place in complete disarray. Cabinets had been ransacked, papers scattered everywhere, drawers turned upside down. The police had gone through everything. Still, I wasn't worried. Aaron had scrubbed my computer clean, leaving nothing for them to find. As I tidied up, I couldn't help but let the weight of it all crash down on me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I allowed myself to break down. A week ago, I thought I had a solid marriage, a stable life. Now, I was a suspect in a crime I didn't commit. My wife had betrayed me, and her boss was trying to ruin my life. How had everything fallen apart so fast? Thankfully, the media hadn't caught wind of it. They were too busy chasing a massive scandal involving missing billions in public funds, so I flew under the radar. That was one small mercy. By the time the weekend rolled around, I threw myself into work, letting Jacob and Henry handle the legal battle. Toward the end of the following week, Henry called with news that left me stunned. "All charges against you have been dropped," he said, his voice calm and steady. I blinked, struggling to absorb the relief. "Wait, what? How?" "It turns out the inspector assigned to your case is someone who doesn't take kindly to blackmail, and she saw right through Blake's scheme." I let out a long, shaky breath. "And what about Blake?" "Well," Henry continued, "she's filed charges against him for blackmail, evidence tampering, and possession of illegal material. Laura, meanwhile, is facing charges of conspiracy." I was quiet, trying to process everything. Laura would face justice, too. It was a lot to take in, but it felt like a step toward closure. Not long after I hung up with Henry, Jacob called, inviting me over for dinner that evening. He and Jessica had been such a solid support throughout this ordeal, and I was grateful for their friendship. As I was driving to their place, another call came through, this time from Catherine Davis, my family law attorney. James, I wanted to let you know Laura's lawyer reached out today. She's ready to sign the divorce papers with no changes. That's good news, I said, already feeling the weight lift a little more. Finally, a fresh start seemed within reach. There is one condition, though, Catherine added. Laura's insisting on a 90-minute private meeting with you. She's suggesting it take place at my office. The last thing I wanted was to sit face-to-face with Laura after everything. But if it meant expediting the divorce, it might be worth it. I instructed Catherine to set it up. We scheduled the meeting for the following Wednesday. That evening, I finally allowed myself to relax, enjoying a peaceful dinner with Jacob and Jessica. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. Jessica had cooked coconut shrimp with rice, and we spent the night talking about anything but legal battles or betrayals. It was the break I didn't realize I needed. When I got home later that night, I felt something I hadn't in a while. Peace. Despite having weathered the storm, the looming meeting with Laura weighed heavily on my mind. Even though I was the victim in this whole twisted mess, I couldn't shake the anxiety about seeing her again. When Wednesday finally arrived, I made my way to Catherine's office. She greeted me at the door with a word of caution. James, I'm not entirely sure what Laura's motives are for this meeting, but I must warn you, she's still facing criminal charges. Don't say anything that could be used against you in court. We can't search her for a recording device, so assume she may be recording the conversation. Understood, I nodded, grateful for the advice. Catherine then led me to a small private room where Laura was already seated. I had braced myself for the cold, arrogant woman I'd seen over the past few weeks, but the person sitting across from me now was someone else entirely. Her face was gaunt, her eyes swollen and red from crying. For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of compassion stir inside me, but the memory of her betrayal, of her callousness, quickly snuffed it out. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, James," she said, her voice trembling as if the words weighed heavily on her. I kept my expression cold. "What could you possibly have to say to me, Laura? After everything?" Her tears began to fall as she struggled to speak. "I'm so ashamed of what I've done to you. You were a good husband, better than I deserved. I was completely wrapped up in Andrew's influence, and I didn't see it. When I found out the charges against you were dropped and that we might face prosecution instead, it was like a slap in the face. I realized how blind I'd been. I can't even stand to look at myself anymore." For the next 45 minutes, she poured her heart out, offering an impromptu self-analysis of her behavior. She didn't ask for forgiveness, which I appreciated, because she seemed to understand the depth of her betrayal. "I know it's over between us," she continued, her voice quieter now. "If I were you, I'd want a divorce too. I don't blame you for ending things. I've already resigned from my job, and I've told Andrew I never want to see him again. I've moved back in with my parents, and they're furious with me. Let's just say home doesn't feel very welcoming right now." I sat in silence, watching her. There wasn't much left to say. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. There was no chance for reconciliation. None at all. "The coming months are going to be tough for me, James," she added, barely meeting my eyes. "I don't know what's next for me, but maybe, down the line, we could at least be friends?" I shook my head slightly. "That's a long way off, Laura. Maybe someday, but not anytime soon. Best of luck." Without waiting for her response, I stood and walked out of the room. Part of me still had feelings for her, but reconciliation was impossible. In the end, life had already punished her enough. There was no need for more. Laura eventually struck a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Andrew in exchange for leniency. She moved to another city after that, and we lost touch. When Andrew's crimes became public, 2 other men stepped forward, accusing him of blackmail. He was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison. I didn't even need to testify, as the police already had enough evidence, including the recordings I'd made. After his conviction, I filed a civil case against Andrew and his law firm, securing a $1.5 million settlement. A large portion went to Jacob for his help and support throughout this ordeal. It was a fitting reward for someone who had stood by me through thick and thin. As for me, life went on. My business continued to grow, and I was in the process of acquiring a small door manufacturing company to expand my operations. With 6 employees who felt like family, I was content. A few days after my divorce was finalized, Jacob and Jessica invited me to a barbecue at their place. It was there that I met Jessica's sister, Olivia. We hit it off, and we've been dating ever since. A few weeks later, after settling the civil case, I decided to pay Andrew a visit in prison. I wanted to see him face to face, to let him know that he hadn't broken me. Instructing the guard to make sure he stayed for the conversation, I sat down across from him with a smirk on my face. The moment Andrew saw me, his expression soured. "What do you want, cuck?" he sneered, starting to rise from his chair, but the guard forced him to sit back down. I ignored his insult and kept my tone casual. "Oh, I just wanted to see how you're doing. Heard your wife, Chloe, filed for divorce. Maybe I should take her out sometime, give her the night she deserves." His face turned beet red and he clenched his fists. "You bastard. If you ever—" Cutting him off, I grinned wider. "Save it. I've already taken her out. And by the way, that cute dove tattoo on her thigh? Yeah, I noticed that." Andrew's face went crimson with rage, but he couldn't do anything. He knew threats were useless now. "But I'm not here to talk about Chloe," I said, leaning back. "I just wanted to remind you that you're a fool. Remember when you told me things that were illegal for someone like me were perfectly fine for someone like you? Well, look at you now, wearing a jumpsuit in prison. It suits you perfectly." Andrew was trembling with anger, but I wasn't done. "Before I go, I wanted to leave you with a little something. Both Chloe and Laura thought you'd find this enlightening." I handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, stared at it for a second, then looked up at me, confused. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. I chuckled. "It's a diagram of female anatomy. They wanted you to know that the arousal point is here," I said, pointing to the drawing with a smirk. Leaving him stewing in his rage, I walked out of the prison, satisfied that I'd had the last word.
Have a great day.